Bethan is going to talk about newborn screening and share her experience of when her daughter was suspected of congenital hypothyroidism on newborn blood spot screening in early 2021.
Little boy, Miles, in June 2019, and then Violet was born February of this year. I was placed under consultant-led care from 20 weeks with Violet because Miles was born at 34 weeks due to suspected preeclampsia, which affected his growth. So I was placed on aspirin and I had weekly blood pressure checks with the community midwives. The pregnancy itself was absolutely fine, progressed normally. Violet started off measuring small on her line, but then continued to follow the line, so there were no concerns. And by the last scan, she'd sort of jumped up a centile, so they were quite happy with her progression and her growth. She was absolutely fine. With Miles being born prematurely, he went across to the special care baby unit. So his test was done over there whilst I was still on the ward. So presumably I consented along the way, which is fine. And the only thing that I recall from his test was the little mark left on the heel, and then the letter a few weeks later to confirm that nothing had been detected in the screening. So Violet's was different. She went to terms, so stayed with me. And I do remember at discharge, the midwife discussing the blood spot screening being done at home by a midwife, which was news to me because I thought that maybe we'd go to the hospital again for it. So that was a new one. I don't remember whether there was any written information given on it, but I do know that I was given a pack, but I think in that sort of sleep-deprived survival mode state, you sort of tend to put things to one side and sort of forget about them or dig them out a little bit later when you need them. The day of the actual test was sort of a typical February day in Wales. It was cold, and we were all at home. So that was myself, my husband, Miles, who was 20 months, and Violet. And we were still going through the adjustment period with Violet and Miles because it was still very early on. Violet had been sleeping, or was sleeping, when the midwife called. So she was extremely disgruntled at having to have her foot taken out of the nice warm baby grow and being woken up at the same time. So she started to cry in an extremely high-pitched manner. We found out since then that Violet is difficult to bleed, and she consistently has problems with collecting enough blood for her tests. So as the midwife was trying to get the blood samples needed, Violet continued to cry, which then did Miles crying because he didn't quite understand what was going on. There just seemed to be this air of chaos and panic in the room, I think. And it certainly was quite a chaotic feeling with being sleep deprived and having two crying babies. The midwife wasn't happy with the first test that she did. She didn't feel that it would be accepted. So she had a student midwife with her, and she asked her to go to the car to get another card so that she could redo and at this point Violet was well and truly annoyed that her other foot had to come out of the baby grow. So she continued to scream. And my husband then had to remove Miles from the room to try and sort of dispel the chaotic feeling. And the midwife then did the samples using the other heel. It was a better sample. I think Violet had cried herself so much that the blood was flowing a bit better. It was a better sample, but I could tell that the midwife still wasn't 100% happy with the sample that she had, but did feel that it would be accepted, and that was that. So another midwife contacted to say that the results had come back indicate the congenital hypothyroidism, and so she would need to come back out, retake the test. We agreed that she would do that afternoon, and following that phone call, I did the classic. I googled the condition, which then led me to honing in on the negatives with that, and the fact that Violet could have learning difficulties. I became quite upset at that because I hadn't expected it. I'd assumed that it would be exactly like Miles. I'd get a letter and that would be the end of it. And Violet didn't appear to be unwell. There didn't appear to be anything wrong with her. She was perfectly healthy. She was sleeping, eating like a newborn, really. So I do remember feeling quite upset. My husband had gone out with Miles to collect something. So I was alone and sort of looking at it myself and working myself up. When the midwife did come to retest, she did explain that if the results were detected again, then Violet would be put on a treatment plan immediately and wouldn't have any side effects as a result. And she did reassure me that it was the milder of the diagnosis that could be picked up on the screening. I did discuss with her the previous test and the fact that the midwife hadn't been particularly happy with the sample she'd taken. And we did discuss that the possibility that may have been affected. The sample was better on this occasion because Violet was warmer, Miles wasn't around, so there was less chaos. And the possibility could be that as it was borderline, it may come back that this time that there was nothing detected. And I sort of convinced myself then following that would be the result and things would be fine. But I received a phone call from the doctor who confirmed that, again, the results had come back detecting the congenital hypothyroidism. And because of that, both Violet and I would need to attend the hospital the following day for further blood tests. She did advise me not to look online at anything if I was able to resist the urge, explaining that everything I would need to be told would be spoken about the following day and then the follow-up appointment with herself the week after. But did give me a website should I need to look at anything. It was, I suppose, to me it was out of the blue. Although Violet's first test had come back as showing it, I wasn't expecting it. I'd sort of convinced myself it was borderline, this sample was better. So it did feel out of the blue to me, but it was dealt with very well. I think the doctor was sympathetic on the phone, and she gave the information needed. And I knew the plan following that then. So it was a hospital appointment for Violet and I to have blood tests, and then she would follow it up the following week. So it was a full day's appointment where blood was taken from both Violet and I, myself, to make sure that there were no problems with my thyroid and it wasn't a hereditary condition. They wanted us to stay for the duration because they were fast tracking the blood work and wanted us to be there so that they could decide whether treatment would be needed. So we were seen by a number of doctors for various checks and things. So Violet was looked over, had her weight taken, she had sats done, she had a little blood pressure cuff put on her foot. And then another doctor came in to explain that he would be taking the blood and they were fast tracking it, and that he could also take my blood rather than me having to go down to the haematology department. He then said that he would be back, he would take Violet's blood and then send it off as an urgent. We were then visited by a specialist in the field who explained that there would be 3 options depending on the results that came back. So it would be either come back with no traces and no further action to be taken, maybe a watch and wait, so maybe consider depending on future blood tests, or it would be treatment from that day. But he did reassure me that we would be followed up regardless, so we would still attend the following appointment the week after, more locally. Violet's blood was taken, and then so was mine, and sent off. And then we were visited by another doctor, and it was on this occasion really that I was given the most opportunity to ask any questions that I had. So he went through the congenital hypothyroidism and what it is, explaining to me via diagram as well as words. He asked me whether I had anything I wanted to know, my primary concern being how, if at all, Violet would be affected. He reassured me that should the results show that she needed to be put onto medication, she would just continue with that and then develop, as she would have had her screening not detected, that congenital hypothyroidism. So she wouldn't be negatively affected in any way. He was able to confirm to me that there was nothing that I had done, as that was one of my concerns as well. Had it been something I had or hadn't done in pregnancy which had resulted in this, but he was able to confirm that that wasn't the case, and that nothing could have been caused by anything I had done or not done. And he actually visited on 3 occasions to give me time to process what he'd said and process the information he'd given, and then come back to see whether from that I had anything further I wanted to ask. And he actually gave me written information on it as well, so that I could take it away and have that information to hand if I wanted to look at it. So the results on the day didn't all come back, but the ones that did indicated that they would start treatment immediately. So she was prescribed the levothyroxine. Initially, she was on a slightly higher prescription, which meant that I had to give her a tablet and a half a day, using a little pill cutter to cut an extremely small tablet. I had considered, or I had been told that I could crush the tablets and give it to her in sort of a liquid form with a little bit of milk. But having had experience, not with levothyroxine, but Miles was on another prescription previously, I didn't have much experience, a very good experience with that. I found that he would spit that out anyway. So I thought, well, I'll try giving Violet the tablets as they were. So the first thing, I give her tablets and then follow up with a little bit of milk, and she's absolutely fine. She takes them as they are. The second prescription we had was for liquid form of levothyroxine, which I actually thought might be better, but actually wasn't, because she ended up just spitting it out anyway. So we've reverted back to the tablet form. She still takes it first thing. As she's getting older, she is starting to cough and splutter and be a bit dramatic about it. And she will occasionally try and pop it out of her mouth. But if I see it quickly enough, then I just pop it back in and follow up then with her first milk in the morning, and she's absolutely fine. She just takes it. She's doing really well. She's developing as she would had she not had the congenital hypothyroidism. She's meeting her milestones like other children of her age. She's smiling, giggling, grabbing things. Considering she was born at 6'5", so quite dinky, she certainly continued to put on the weight. So she's a very chunky 7 months old at the moment, but she's lovely. So she seen roughly every 4 to 6 weeks in clinic. Sometimes ahead of the appointment, she'll go for a blood test, or she'll have a blood test on the day. Again, it's very difficult to bleed her, but they make it work somehow. And she's had the scan to show that there is the thyroid there as well, but just not working as it should be at the moment. But it's sort of on average every 4 to 6 weeks. It's extremely important, and I think that as a parent, I didn't realise how important this was until I was faced with this myself. I think I just assumed it was one of those things that people refer to as the heel prick test, and it's just one of those things you assume is done as part of having a newborn, and that's that. And I suppose my experience with Miles also led me to believe that, because I just recall having a letter, putting it in his red book, and that was the end of that. I don't think that I fully understood what was being looked for and what could be picked up, which I think is really important to get that out to parents ahead of the baby arriving, exactly what the test is, what it entails, what it's looking for, and what could come back, and how that will be managed if there is a result. From Violet and I's experience, everything has been brilliant from start to finish. The entire team, the time taken to get everything in place, everything's just been brilliant. I do think, though, that perhaps the information prior to the arrival, as I said, it needs to be given so that you know exactly what you're consenting to and exactly what may arise, because it isn't one of the worst ones. Of course, there are things that are worse that could be picked up, and we're extremely lucky with that. But I didn't expect it. And like I said, I just sort of went along as it was one of those routine things that was done. I think more information needs to be given, and a discussion had around it, so that you know exactly what is going to happen should this or this come back from it. That's all I would say really, is making sure the parents are aware of what the test is and what it's looking for.
Thank you, Bethan, for giving up your time to have a chat about newborn blood spot screening in Wales. We really do appreciate it, and thank you, Violet, as well.
No problem.